Have you ever caught yourself thinking, I just don't care what people think anymore? Or perhaps you found yourself saying no to things that 5 years ago you would have automatically agreed to. Maybe you're questioning your career, your relationships, or even the life you've spent decades building. Midlife is a time of significant transition and change. And one of the biggest shifts that many people experience in their 40s and 50s is the desire to live more authentically, to finally be true to themselves. But what does that actually mean? Does it simply mean speaking your mind, saying no more often, or caring less about other people's opinions? Or is there something much deeper happening beneath the surface? That's what I'd love to explore with you today because I think authenticity is one of those words that we use all the time without ever really stopping to define it. And when we misunderstand what authenticity really is, we can accidentally mistake exhaustion, frustration, or emotional reactions for being true to ourselves. So, today I'd like to gently unpack three of the biggest myths about authenticity and then begin exploring what it actually means to come home to yourself. Kia ora and hello. Welcome to the Living Midlife Well podcast. I'm Janine Lattimore, a well-being coach here to help people in midlife get off the treadmill of stress and exhaustion, rediscover their joy, and create a life that is aligned with who they really are and what they really want. I'm so glad you've joined me today. Perhaps make yourself a cup of tea or coffee, settle in wherever you are, and let's explore this topic together. One of the most common shifts that people describe themselves having in midlife is living more authentically. It is something that I also frequently refer to in my writing. In light of this, I think it would be a really good idea to define what it means to be true to yourself and live authentically. I thought the easiest way to do this would actually be to start with what authenticity isn't. There are three ideas that are often presented in the media and in popular culture that sound like authenticity, but I don't think they really capture its deeper meaning. Let's begin with the first one. Myth one: speaking your truth means freely expressing your thoughts and feelings. I would like to start with dispelling a common misconception about what it means to speak your truth. Something that is repeatedly seen in the media at the moment is where speaking your truth is shown as being freely expressing your thoughts and emotions without holding anything back. Speaking your truth is not venting your thoughts and emotions, and feeling authentically does not mean letting your emotions run the show. Your emotions are not your truth. What is underneath the emotion is closer to your truth. From an evolutionary perspective, emotions developed to give us information and motivation. Emotion is your brain telling you something and motivating you to respond to that information. To discover what your truth is, it is helpful to ask yourself, what is this emotion telling me? Why do I feel this? The emotion is a signal. What is it signaling? I find that idea really helpful. Instead of seeing emotions as something to get rid of or something to completely identify with, we can simply become curious about them. Rather than saying, this is who I am, we can ask, what is this experience trying to show me? That small shift creates space between you and the emotion. And it's often in that space that we begin hearing our authentic voice. Now let's move on to the second myth. Myth two: living authentically means finally saying no. The second misunderstanding that I often see in media is where people confuse living authentically with another thing that happens for many people in midlife, which is that our tolerance for bullshit shrinks. The two can be related, but they are not the same thing. Creating a boundary because you have made a loving and conscious decision that something is no longer serving your well being is very different from saying no to things because you can't be bothered dealing with them anymore. Most of us have reduced capacity in midlife. It results from decades of managing multiple responsibilities, problems, and organizational loads. By our 40s, the majority of us have bodies that are functioning in survival mode because of ongoing stress. Couple this with the effects of body wear or aging and hormonal changes, and we end up like an old cell phone that never gets fully recharged, has a battery that drains quickly, and which can barely run the apps it has loaded, let alone download new ones. In that state, being honest feels like telling the world it can just fuck off. And while this may feel like your truth, authenticity is not actually linked to what you won't tolerate anymore. It is linked to your joy. Telling the world to F off after decades of running yourself ragged, looking after everyone else, may feel empowering, but it is not being true to yourself. Your authentic self is who you are when you are fully connected to love, appreciation, peace, and joy. It's who you are when you are fully relaxed and not just being more strongly reactive. Let's just pause here for a moment because I think we've already uncovered something quite important. So far, we've explored two common myths. The first is that authenticity means saying everything you're feeling. The second is that authenticity means simply saying no more often. But I don't think either of those ideas gets to the heart of what being true to yourself really means. The next myth, I think, is perhaps the biggest one of all because it asks a much deeper question. What if many of the personality traits you've always believed were simply who you are, aren't actually who you are at all? Let's explore that. Myth 3. Your personality traits are your truth. The third myth that I would like to address is that many people believe that the common personality traits that they exhibit are just who they are. That is not entirely true. I believe that there are some personality tendencies that we are born with, but most are learned. We learn behaviours and the beliefs that anchor them from mirroring the people we grew up with. We also develop a lot of behaviours based on what we think we need to do to hide, perform, or please in order to survive. I think this is where the conversation becomes really interesting because if so much of our behaviour has been learned over the course of our lives, then who are we underneath all of that? To help answer that question, I'd like to introduce a way of thinking about ourselves that has really helped me make sense of authenticity. Let's talk about the difference between our ego and our authentic self. Before we do, though, I would like to ask that if you are enjoying this episode, then please take a moment to give it a like and to subscribe to receive more. Thanks so much. So, if our emotions aren't our truth, and if authenticity isn't simply saying no more often, then who are we underneath all of that? I think that's one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves in midlife. All of the aspects of our personality that I mentioned when I was talking about myth 3, the ones we learn from others and the ones we take on to survive in the world, are connected to a part of us that we can call the ego. You can think of your ego as being like your storefront. It is the part of you that you package, present, and market to the world, and which develops to allow you to function in the world. It is the roles that you play and the behaviors that you perform. It is the conditioning you take on from other people, society, and media about how to behave, what is right and wrong, and what you need to have. Our ego is also what drives us to compare ourselves to others and to want to achieve things. Your ego is the part of you that wants to prove your ability and worth, and which seeks approval and validation from others. Some people talk about the ego as a bad thing, but I think it is simply one part of our mind, one part of our awareness. It helps us to function in the world, and we can't really participate in everyday life without it. However, it is not your true self. And a key part of personal growth is learning to identify what is attached to your ego and who you are underneath that. Who you are underneath your emotions, your behaviors, your roles, and even your thoughts is your true self. And I think this is what many people do mean or want in midlife when they talk about living more authentically. It's this shedding of the old identity that we built to please other people and follow society's definition of success, but which we realized didn't actually satisfy us or make us happy. It's the desire to be and do the things that you've been putting on hold, the things that have lived under the surface for years because they didn't fit the storefront the outside world was directing you to be. It's the realization that you've been living your life for someone else and building someone else's dream rather than your own. That desire to live more authentically and to be true to ourselves naturally leads us to the next question. How do we recognize our authentic self? I often talk about living in alignment with who you truly are, but how do you know who you truly are? I've got some ideas to help you with this. Stay with me. In order to understand what your true self is, it is helpful to clarify what it is not as well as what it is. Let's start with what it isn't. Your true self is not anything that comes from comparing yourself to someone else, anything that comes from achieving a level of performance or recognition, anything where you are trying to prove something, anything that comes from pleasing others, and anything that comes from fear, including hiding parts of yourself or limiting yourself in any way. Now let's look at what your true self is. Your true self is who you are when you are operating from deep self acceptance, self love, and self respect. It's who you are when you don't need to prove or explain yourself to anyone. What is true to you is what energizes you from your center core outwards. It's what comes from a place of love as pure positive energy. So far, we've explored the myths around authenticity and we've started separating the person you learn to become from the person you truly are. Now, I'd like to share a simple framework that has helped me understand this in a slightly different way. I find this framework useful because it reminds us that every part of ourselves has served a purpose. The goal isn't to reject parts of ourselves, it's simply to understand them. This framework categorizes our self in terms of three aspects or parts: the conditioned self, the protective self, and the authentic self. We can connect the conditioned self and the protective self to the ego, and the authentic self to our true self. I like this framework because it shows that each of the different aspects play a part in helping us function in life. They are all valid. I think that personal growth is not about getting rid of any of these parts of ourselves, but rather understanding how and when each one is operating. That understanding gives us more choice in terms of how we live our life. First up, the conditioned self. The conditioned self is the person we've learned to become. It forms through family, school, culture, expectations, fear, success, and basic survival. This self asks, what do I need to do to be accepted? Secondly, the protective self. The protective self is the habits we developed to keep ourselves safe. This includes people pleasing, perfectionism, overachieving, controlling, avoiding conflict, staying busy, and never asking for help. These aren't who we are, they're protective strategies. Thirdly, the authentic self. The authentic self is the person underneath all of that. It's the self who naturally values curiosity, kindness, honesty, creativity, humor, calm, generosity, adventure, and connection. This is the authentic self we desire to reconnect with in midlife. Now, at this point, you may be thinking, that all makes sense in theory, but how do I actually discover my authentic self? And that's what we're going to finish up with today, because I think there are four very simple questions that can begin opening that door. Again, it is helpful here to start with identifying how you are not being true to yourself. To begin doing that, you can ask yourself the first three questions that I will list next to help you identify where you are hiding, performing, or pleasing. The information from those first three questions will help you answer the last one and identify your true self. I invite you to take your time with these. Let the first three questions sit with you over a few days or more as you observe what you are thinking, feeling, and doing as you move through your daily life. Holding these questions in your mind may help you to notice things about yourself that you hadn't noticed before. I also encourage you to write down your responses and observations. Writing things down helps you to externalize your thoughts and to see things from a different perspective. The first question is, where am I hiding? In what ways do you hold back or hide parts of yourself? The second question is, where am I performing? In what ways are you trying to earn approval? The third question is, where am I pleasing? In what ways are you saying yes when you really mean no? And once you've spent some time reflecting on those, ask yourself the final question. Who am I when I stop doing those things? Again, just sit with that question. Be curious about it. Don't be in a rush to answer it. Sometimes the most important answers don't arrive all at once. They emerge slowly, one moment, one insight at a time. As I close out this episode, let me leave you with this. Being authentic isn't about becoming someone different. It's about removing everything that isn't really you. It's letting go of the roles you've been playing for decades. It's making decisions that align with your values instead of your fears. It's choosing what brings peace rather than what wins approval. It's connecting to your joy. It's appreciating your innate talents and interests. It's recognizing your own beauty. It's flowing in your creative energy. It's coming home to yourself. And before we finish today, I'd like to leave you with one simple action to try this week. I call it just one thing. My just one thing action point invite for you is to notice what emotions you feel today. And instead of seeing them as who you are, see them as a signal. When you notice an emotion, first, name it with the phrase, I am feeling. For example, I am feeling sadness. Then gently ask yourself, what is this emotion telling me about what I want or need? Recognizing that you are not your feelings, but rather that your feelings are something you experience, is an easy first step to becoming more self aware of your true self. I hope that today's conversation has encouraged you to think about authenticity in a slightly different way. Perhaps living authentically isn't about becoming louder, tougher, or more rebellious. Perhaps it's something much quieter. Perhaps it's simply remembering who you were before fear, expectations, and the need for approval convinced you to become someone else. And perhaps that's one of the greatest gifts of midlife. Not that we finally find ourselves, but that we finally give ourselves permission to come home to who we've been all along. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If you found this interesting or helpful, then please remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment or review. It really does support me, and it also helps other people discover the podcast so that they can benefit from these conversations too. Until next time, keep living midlife well. Aroha nui, much love. I'm Janine, and I look forward to connecting again on the next episode. Bye for now.